Une lecture du livre d'Ésaïe. En effet, je vais créer un ciel nouveau et une terre nouvelle. Personne ne se souviendra plus du passé, et on n'y pensera plus du tout. Débordez de joie, réjouissez-vous sans cesse à cause de ce que je vais créer. De Jérusalem, je vais faire une ville remplie de joie, et de ses habitants, un peuple débordant de joie. Je me réjouirai à cause de Jérusalem. Je déborderai de joie à cause de mon peuple. On n'entendra plus de pleurs ni d'appels au secours. Il n'y aurait plus de bébés qui ne vivent que quelques jours. Les adultes ne mourront pas avant d'être vieux. Le plus jeune mourra à 100 ans, et mourir avant 100 ans sera considéré comme une malédiction. Ils bâtiront des maisons et les habiteront. Ils planteront des vignes et mangeront le raisin. Écoutez la parole du Seigneur.
A responsive reading from Psalm 98. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Burst into jubilant song with music. Make music to the Lord with the harp and the sound of singing. Let the sea resound and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. Let the rivers clap their hands. Let the mountains sing together for joy.
Let us sing before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world with righteousness, and the people with integrity.
Amen. A reading from the book of Revelation. I did not see a temple in the city, because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and the Lamb is its lamp. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendor into it. On no day will its gates ever be shut, for there will be no night there. The glory and honor of the nations will be brought into it. Nothing impure will ever enter it, nor will anyone who does what is shameful or deceitful, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be any curse. The throne of God and of the Lamb will be in the city, and his servants will serve him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. There will be no more night. They will not need the light of a lamp or the light of the sun, for the Lord God will give them light, and they will reign forever and ever. The Gospel of Christ.
Thanks be to God.
Good morning. How are you? Good. Let's see. Yeah. Let's see if this works. There we go. So last week, the title was How to Conquer the World. And we saw how the kingdom of God is destined to triumph over all the kingdoms of the earth. Now today, how God will liberate his world. So, when it comes to the book of Revelation, we often come to this book with this question in mind. How is it all going to end? We're fascinated with questions of the end of all things, like we're fascinated with the question of the beginning of all things. And that's probably why the books of Genesis and Revelation are so controversial, oftentimes. However, there's a risk when we bring our questions to the Bible, and because we already expect in some way what kind of answer we should find in the Bible. But the fact remains, our questions reflect our concerns and not always the concerns of God. So let's take a look at an example of the apostles bringing one of these questions to the risen Jesus. This is in the story of the Ascension at the beginning of the book of Acts. So outside Jerusalem, Jesus is there with the disciples, and they present their question to Jesus. Lord, is this the time when you will restore the kingdom to Israel? He replied, it is not for you to know the times or periods that the Father has set by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. So, like good, faithful Jews, the disciples are very eager to know if Jesus is going to do what they know the Messiah is supposed to do. No. Is Jesus finally going to liberate Israel from her enemies and make her the dominant nation on the world stage? Isn't that what Psalm 2 had been all about? We read that last week. Why do the nations rage? Why do they conspire against Yahweh and against his anointed? And the anointed king of Yahweh will rule the nations from Zion with a rod of iron. That's a verse that is quoted several times in Revelation, by the way. So the disciples are eager to know if Jesus is going to put this messianic program into practice, okay? The cross and resurrection had taken the disciples completely by surprise. They could never have imagined that the Messiah would die and rise from death as an advanced sign of the world to come. They had been completely discombobulated by the events that had happened in the previous weeks. But now they want to know, okay, Lord, is it the time when you're going to do what you're supposed to do? And Jesus gives an interesting answer. He kind of deflects the question and says, well, actually, guys, you're missing the big picture. The plan of the Creator, the kingdom of God, is much bigger than any expectations or hopes you might have for your own nation. God's plan involves the entire creation, the entire world. And of course, as Jesus had tried to explain to his disciples earlier on, the kingdom of God functions very differently from the kingdoms of the world. And Jesus had tried to explain that he was a Messiah who would reign in a very different way from the kings that they were used to and the reigns of kings they were used to experiencing. His reign had begun from the cross, or in Revelation's language, the rule of the Lamb had begun when he had been slaughtered by his enemies. So, when we bring our questions about the end of all things to the book of Revelation, we are surprised to find that Revelation does not come to a close with an ending, but rather with a new beginning. This is how Revelation 21 begins, the second to last chapter of Revelation. John says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God." Now, it's important to note that the new creation that John has a vision of here has already begun. The new creation actually began on Easter morning. The resurrection of Jesus was the launch of God's new world, and the themes of kingdom and creation always go together. Jesus was enthroned on the cross on Good Friday, and the new creation began on Easter morning. Now, back to the apostles' question. They're wondering about the kingdom of Israel, but Jesus is telling them that they are actually standing in a whole new world. The situation has changed since the resurrection. Jesus is now Lord of the world. The age to come, as we call it, has begun, while the present age still continues. So the New Testament tells us that we're living in two worlds simultaneously. The world as we know it is winding down, and the world as God wants it to be is coming into being. Now, as we look around, or as we watch the news, it's easy to forget that the world has been redeemed and is being remade. It's easy to despair that things can ever change for the better. We often have the impression that things are just going from worse to worse. And it's often tempting to think that the goal of the Christian life is just to get away from this horrible place. Maybe there's just nothing we can do, and it's best just to wait until we get to heaven, and then everything will be all right. But that's never what the New Testament actually says. Our God is the creator. We are in our Father's world. Jesus is Lord of the earth. We are the people of God, which means we are exactly where we're supposed to be. We are where we belong. We are called to make God's purposes go forward in this world by the power of the Spirit. Now, of course, we often feel the tension that comes from the fact that the age to come is not yet fully here. We are still in the present age while we wait for the full manifestation of the age to come. Sometimes the New Testament calls us strangers or pilgrims in the world, and that's true as well. But at the same time, we are also exactly where God wants us to be, equipped to do what God has called us to do. Sometimes that's exciting. Sometimes that's scary. Sometimes it's overwhelming, Who am I? Sam Farrugia, what can I do? On my own, not much. But for reasons best known to him, God has chosen me, us, as his people, and he's given us what we need to do what he's called us to do. Do we dare to step forward in faith and take those small steps of obedience every day? Do we dare to embody the love of God in this world that seems, forgive the expression, hell-bent on hatred, division, and violence? Whew, okay. So how is it all going to end? Well, as we've seen, it's not going to end. There will be no full stop in the plans of God for his world. There's going to be a new beginning, a new creation. What is this new creation going to be like? Well, the book of Revelation appeals to our imagination. How would we imagine the perfect world? The world as God intended it to be. What would that be like? Well, the book of Revelation offers us some tantalizing hints as to what awaits. And of course, Revelation is a very poetic book. It's not a journalistic report, but Revelation invites us to imagine this new world. So, Revelation 21 begins once again with saying, John says, I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, see, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. Now, the ancient world was full of temples, much like our world is full of places of worship, temples, mosques, synagogues, churches. And of course, in the ancient world, the gods were believed to inhabit their temples in some way. And of course, in every temple, you'd have an image of the god or goddess in question. And that would tell you who the temple was dedicated to. And of course, the last step in constructing a temple in the ancient world would be to install the statue of the god in its rightful place within the shrine. Now, let's think back to Genesis for a minute. The author of Genesis tells the story of the creation of the world in a way that an ancient architect would immediately recognize as the story of the construction of a temple. The way Genesis 1 describes the creation of the world is the way that temples were constructed in the ancient world. And what is created on the sixth day of creation in Genesis chapter 1? The last thing to be created before God rested was human beings, right? Yeah. A woman and a man created in the image of God, created in the image of God. So the last thing to be created in Genesis 1 is the image of the God who's been creating everything. So the cosmic temple is constructed, and then at the end, the image of the Creator is placed in the midst of creation. So that's part of what's going on in Genesis 1, and that's a fascinating vision of what humans are. Of course, a few months ago, Pastor Chris led us through a whole series of messages on the image of God. So this is not completely new. And of course, part of being created in the image of God was for the woman and the man to rule over the creation, right? And they had the authority from the Creator to wisely and lovingly govern the world. And of course, the gift of authority has been corrupted ever since the fall. Rebellion against God's authority had led to human tyranny vis-a-vis each other and vis-a-vis the world. But of course, in Revelation, once the new world is in place, the human vocation to rule is restored. As we saw at the end of our reading, the servants of God will reign forever and ever in the new world. So, we're promised a new Jerusalem, a new city. And of course, this reminds us of that time in the Old Testament when God went camping for 40 years. You remember the story of Moses and the Israelites who traveled through the wilderness. And there was this tent that they would carry along with them and set up wherever they set up camp. This was called the tabernacle. And this is where Yahweh made his presence manifest. And of course, that word in Revelation 21, where it says, the home of God will be with humans, it's actually the word tabernacle. God will set up his tabernacle with humans, John tells us in Revelation 21. Now, this is an expression of the Creator's desire not to remain far away and aloof, apart from his creation, but to dwell in the very midst of his world, in the center of his people. So, in the New Jerusalem, we have this promise that God will dwell with his people. There will be no temple in the New Jerusalem, John tells us. Now, this might seem very strange. The God who dwelt in the tabernacle in the wilderness at the time of Moses was the God who dwelt in the temple in Jerusalem during the time of the kings and the monarchy in ancient Israel. There had always been a place to go in ancient Israel to worship Yahweh. But now in Revelation, John says, in the New Jerusalem, in the new world, there will be no temple. But, John tells us, God and the Lamb will be the temple. There will be no separation, no barrier between God's people and the unmediated, immediate presence of the Creator. John tells us God's people will see his face. The God who designed the whole cosmos as a temple in which his human creatures would represent him as his image bearers, the God who went camping for 40 years in the desert with his people, this God will flood the temple of his new world with his immediate and palpable presence. Heaven and earth will be united in the new world which is unveiled at the close of Revelation, a world suffused with the presence of the giver of life, which means that the new world is one without death, without pain, and without sad tears. We have hints in Revelation that this new world will be a new Eden. The river of life is described, the tree of life is described, which we find in the Garden of Eden way back in Genesis. It reappears in the new world. And there's that fascinating verse in Revelation 22. The tree of life, which bears its fruit every month of the year, has leaves. And the leaves of the tree of life, John tells us, are for the healing of the nations. We are told that the nations will walk by the light of the New Jerusalem. The kings of the earth will bring their glory into the city. And the leaves of the tree of life are for the healing of the nations. Now, this is incredible. Remember Psalm 2 once again? The nations and the kings of the earth have always been the enemies of the Creator, the enemies of Yahweh, the enemies of the people of God. The nations have always raged against the Creator. The kings of the earth have always tried to conquer the world, to oppress the people of God. They're the ones who need to be ruled with the rod of iron, Psalm 2 said. But now, in Revelation 22, in the new world, these nations who have always rebelled against God are not destined for annihilation. They're destined for healing. That's hard to imagine. The nations of the world who are still fighting each other, who are still causing untold suffering to millions of innocent people, the kings of the earth and the nations of the world are destined, John tells us, for healing. The Creator of the world wants to heal and remake his world. Are we ready to play our part in that plan? That is the call. We are called to embody the love of God and contribute to his work of healing and peace. And of course, that starts within our own hearts. It starts within our own community. It starts with us. It starts now. It starts here. The God who judges is also the God who saves. The God who wounds is also the God who heals. So perhaps one way we can conceptualize the entire book of Revelation is the story of how the Creator operates on his world, which has been sickened by sin and wounded by evil, in order to finally heal it and reconcile it to himself. In the beginning, in Genesis, God created the world and he said at the end of each day of creation, "It is good." For God, it is a good thing that there is a world that exists with his human image bearers living in it. And God never changed his mind. One more glance at the disciples' question. With the risen Jesus, "Lord, is this the time when you will restore the kingdom to Israel?" Well, as for the apostles right before the ascension of Jesus, so it is for us. We have our questions, we have our concerns, we have our ideas of how the world might end or is supposed to end. But the biblical vision is much greater than most of what we hear, often what we hear, what we often find in Christian literature, on Christian TV shows, Christian movies. God's plan is much larger. God has promised to remake his world, and in the meantime, just as Jesus told the disciples, don't worry about the timing, but go and be my witnesses. So Jesus tells us today, we have a job to do. The time of all things is in God's hands, but we are sent as witnesses to the goodness of God and to the love of Christ. In this world of violence and war and injustice, we are called to witness to restorative justice and love. Jesus is Lord. We are the people of the Creator. Let us follow the risen Jesus with joyful hope as we serve him in our own lives and ultimately impact the world. Amen. Is there a minute for a question, maybe? Yeah. If there's a question on anything that has been said since last week, I'd be glad to field a question. Perhaps this is a new way of thinking about the book of Revelation and about this whole theme of what the theologians call eschatology. And yes, Yusuf has a question. Yeah.
Sam, thank you very much. It's a new interpretation for me, the book of Revelation, but I agree with you 100%. now, in this present days, we are the temples of God,
Yes.
our hearts. But at the end, as you said, God and the Lamb will be the temple and we worshiping him. Now, the kings, you mentioned about the kings of now will be healed. Is there any way how they will be healed?
Yeah.
We don't know.
That's a good question. Yeah.
A criminal will
Yeah.
be set free.
Yeah, rehabilitated. Yeah. That's a very good question. It's there are actually people who are trying to actually live out what that might look like. So if you look up restorative justice, you'll find that there are communities that exist that have been built where convicted criminals are not locked away from the rest of society, which is the typical strategy, right, for dealing with criminals. But in these restorative justice communities, the criminals they actually live in the community with, the non-criminals, those nice people like us, right? And by living together day by day, it's the work of reconciliation that takes place, where those who are guilty of crimes have to face and admit what they did, but they also need to learn how to move forward, right? Because according to this restorative angle on justice, life doesn't end because a crime or evil has been committed, right? Life has to go on, and the goal, of course, is for healing to happen within the life of the guilty person, as well as within the community, which is damaged by the actions of the guilty individual. So if you look up restorative justice communities, you can find information, but there are actually people trying to live this out. So what that will ultimately look like, on the cosmic scale, we don't know. I mean, the Bible doesn't spell it out in detail. We just have these hints as to God's ultimate intention. But I think that these communities that do exist are an example of what we are called to do. Yeah.
It says that we've been healed through the cross, through the Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And at the end, everybody will kneel down and believe that Jesus is the Lord.
Right.
Is this process will be done at the end? Everybody will believe in Jesus Christ to be healed.
I think that's part of it, yeah. But it's true, as it says, St. Paul says in Philippians, every knee will bow and every tongue confess. So yes, I mean, Jesus is Lord even now, and there's that promise that one day everyone will recognize and submit to his reign. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for a new perspective on Revelations. I just have questions in my mind. Each person is responsible for his action, but in Revelations, they're talking still about kings. And to me, it's like there will be no difference. There shouldn't be, whether it is a king or it's whoever, everybody is equal. And I can't wait for that moment because of the injustice and the kings, and this is higher than that, and this has more rights than that. So it just I have a little difficulty understanding that.
Yeah, thanks for that point. Of course, the tendency for our world is for power to be abused, right? So power is used most of the time not to benefit everyone else or the greatest possible number of people, but it's meant to benefit the few who manage to get hold of power. But of course, the biblical vision of power is there in Genesis 1, right? The woman and the man in Genesis 1 are called to have dominion over all creation, not to tyrannize it, but to serve and be stewards of creation. And of course, Jesus is our ultimate exemplar of servant leadership, of true power, right? True power looks like weakness because of our pride, right? We think of power, we think of, self-aggrandizement, celebrity, overwhelming dominance. But true power, according to Jesus, is the way to make everyone around you thrive and ultimately reflect God's glory. Yeah. June, I'll let you tell us when time's up.
This is
Yeah.
great. This is great.
Thank you, Sam. This is such a blessing to hear this morning. I'm so grateful for what you brought to us and grateful to the Lord for you. My question is, as you talk about, well, actually the end is not an end, but a beginning, how would you apply that? You know, each one of us, unless Jesus comes back, we will go through death. How could this impact how we think about our own death?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, the short answer is the resurrection of the dead that is found in the Creed, right? And in passages like 1 Corinthians 15, Romans 8, etc. The promise is that in the new creation, we will all experience a new form of bodily existence, like the resurrected Jesus. So we often say death is not the end, and we often think of, well, once we die, we go off somewhere else, which is true, and as far as it goes. While we wait for this unveiling of the new world, we will be with Christ, as St. Paul says in Philippians 1. But ultimately, the goal is to inhabit the new world in that resurrected life, that new bodily existence, like Jesus had on Easter morning. And again, that leads to all kinds of questions. What is that going to look like? But yeah, that is the scriptural promise, is that everything that the Creator makes is destined to be remade. Even our own bodies, which is a tantalizing and fascinating thought. Yeah. Yeah.
What fascinates me is the leaves of the tree. For the healing, it's not like a instant zap healing. It's like each month, the leaves on the tree, you know, the tree of life, each month there's a leaf for healing.
Right.
So can you expound on that a little? Or you don't know?
Of course I know. No. You're right. I don't know a lot, but you picked up on a very important point. There's this sense at the end of Revelation that the kings of the earth travel to the New Jerusalem on a regular basis. So the idea is that every time they come into the city, they receive more of this healing that's made available to them. You know, how long will this process take? What exactly will it look like? Is not said. But you're right. There is this idea of a gradual restoration going on. And again, my apologies to those who were hoping for a definite answer about eschatology this morning. But yeah, I mean, the book of Revelation actually gives us more questions oftentimes than answers. But who was it? Was it G.K. Chesterton who said that the riddles of God are more satisfying than the answers of man? So there you go. So welcome to the riddles of God. If anyone wants to, any more queries about the riddles of God, or, but by all means, read Revelation, read it again, just as if it was the first time. And a shameless announcement: if you want to go deeper into Revelation, there will be a study group this fall. So stay tuned. Yeah.
Perfect plug. Perfect segue. I'm going to ask that you please stand. Thank you so much, Sam, for those reminders of God's healing in our lives. Let us confess our faith as we say,